Good afternoon, everyone. My name is George. I'm from SBH Queensland, one of the peer mentor support officers. And today I'm here with Geoff Trappett, Paralympian. Good afternoon, Geoff.
Afternoon, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Geoff. And how are you going, my friend?
Yeah, doing well. It's every day when you work in the disability advocacy space is always a new and exciting day, George.
I suppose it would be, mate. So just like to kick off, mate. And we've known each other for quite a few years, and we know your sporting background with my sporting background and that I've retired. But mate, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just ask you about your younger years, when you realised you had your disability and your family and your schooling. And can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and, up to that date?
Sure. I find it really hard to talk about this subject because I realise when I talk to others that I had a pretty privileged upbringing. And I don't mean privileged in terms of the normal way that people use privilege, like in terms of mum and dad had lots of money or anything like that, because that absolutely wasn't the case. What I mean when I talk about privilege is mum and dad treated me like every other kid. The story I always tell when I talk about my sporting stuff was I had older brothers and sisters. I had two older brothers and a sister. They were expected to do some type of sport, and as a byproduct of that, I was expected to do some type of sport, even though I grew up with a disability. Mum and dad saw that as just that you're a young Aussie kid, you did sport, that's just what you did. And I think for me, that was a really privileged childhood for me, because I wasn't brought up as different. I wasn't brought up as special. I was brought up exactly the same as my older brothers and sisters. And that really set me off, I think, on a good track in life to grow up and see that, yeah, sure, I've got some differences. Everybody's got some differences, but it's about how you go about leveling out that playing field of the cards that you've been dealt in life.
Exactly, my friend, exactly. So, mate, just growing up, you went to a normal everyday school?
I did. I went to primary school and high school. I went to what they call in these days a mainstream school, so a non-special school. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I went to schools that were chosen because of their accessibility. The example that I normally give there is I went to a Catholic primary school, but an Anglican high school.
Nice.
So that tells you that the choice of those schools was certainly not based on religion, that's for damn sure.
Exactly.
It was based on those schools being ones that mum and dad saw as being appropriate for me, and a large part of what I am is my disability. So they were some of the choices that mum and dad made that were good ones, that made sure that I had the best access to education that I possibly could.
Yeah, I see you got a number one fan behind you at the moment.
I do, mate. I hate it when people make me use Microsoft Teams, because Microsoft Teams is the only one where I can't do a virtual background. I normally have a nice logo behind me, a nice Inclusion Moves branding logo behind me, and it's the only one where I can't bloody hide the dogs in the background.
Yeah, well, next time we'll use something else, my friend. So,
no, it's fine. They end up taking over all my meetings. There's three of them around. Actually, I'm sitting in one. I'm sitting in front of another one, just to show they're hidden everywhere.
That's all right, mate. At least you've got an audience.
I do. They listen to me. They get in trouble with HR every now and again, but they certainly listen to me rabbit on video conferences all day. I don't envy them.
That's great, mate. So I just want to move forward a bit further into your teenage years. When did you actually start competing? When did you actually start taking up track?
I started doing sport in general when I was about 8 or 10 through Sporting Wheelies and Disabled Association through their junior sports programs. That wasn't necessarily wheelchair track though that I ended up doing at a professional level. Again, much like any kid, I started off doing a bunch of different sports. I did wheelchair basketball, did wheelchair tennis, did a bit of archery, did archery when I'd gone through a couple of operations, which meant that I couldn't do other sports. So in a lot of ways, again, I was like an everyday Aussie kid who tried everything until they found the one that they liked. And I mean, tennis for me, I sucked at. I could get to the ball really quickly, but couldn't hit the thing. Basketball, I suppose you can say, as soon as I ended up in an individual sport, I probably wasn't much of a team player. So I went through all those same decision-making processes that every kid goes through. Yeah.
So, what would you say to someone with a disability? I know we don't want to exclude. We want to be included in inclusion and all that. Who wants to get into a sport for the first time? Doesn't know where to go. Doesn't know what to do. Hasn't got an idea of what they're good at or anything. What would you say to them?
Well, there's a couple of aspects to that. First of all, you've got to seek out, what do your mates do? What are you gonna have mates that do? Because that's a question that everyone asks, disability or not. You find out what your mates do. And if your mates happen to be people with disability that play similar sports that you could play, then all the better. You'll end up hanging out with them more and more. So that's the first thing. And then it's really probably, depending on the age of the kid, it ends up being a parent's role to then find those organisations that could support them. That could be Spina Bifida Association, that could be Sporting Wheelies, that could be any number of organisations now that are a mainstream sporting organisation, and we're getting better at that inclusion stuff. So once you've narrowed down your suite of options, you then look at what the organisations are that are out there that have got a good reputation for including people, because they're the ones that you're going to enjoy. You're going to enjoy the sport the most when you feel included, when you feel part of the team, and really at that young age, enjoyment's what it's about.
Exactly. It's the participating.
Yeah,
which is
it is.
Part about, isn't it? The winning's a bonus, as I say sometimes.
It is, and the winning might come. The winning might not come in the first sport that you try. It might not come in the first 3 sports you try. But you've got to work through that journey of finding the sport that you like and that you're good at before you got a chance of actually getting to the winning bit.
Yeah. So, mate, let's just move on a little bit. Now that you're an adult, you've got your own running your own business, Inclusion Moves. You're married, you've got kids. How do you manage all that with a disability?
Yeah, again, George, I feel pretty privileged. I've got to be honest, my disability doesn't slow me down a whole lot, but there's reasons why it doesn't. And a lot of that comes down for me to good decision making and good planning. So planning to make sure that when you're going through your NDIS plans, that you've got the equipment that you need and the resources you need to be able to live your best life. People with disability need to plan a hell of a lot more than what an able-bodied person needs to do. And those that do understand that and those that plan well, I find tend to be the ones that end up looking back at their life and going, you know what, my disability didn't really tend to affect me too much. And so for me, it's that planning aspect and making sure that you've thought further ahead in your life than you perhaps think you should need to. And certainly further ahead than what an able-bodied person would need to. When you're thinking, geez, what would I like to do for summer next year? Like, what are the things I'd like to get up to in summer? You might need to think about a beach wheelchair. You might need to think about off-road wheels for your chair. Whereas a person without a disability, all they've got to do is the day before they go to the beach, think about whether they've got a beach towel and an umbrella. But for a person with a disability, you've got to think just that little bit further ahead. That's probably the biggest piece of advice I could give anyone, is that planning aspect.
Mate, so I'd like to dive into Inclusion Moves, because I know you're doing a lot of advocacy work for inclusion, especially with the state government, federal government, and I think with council. Yeah. Can you run through a little bit with that for us?
Yeah, sure. So Inclusion Moves is a fancy name for an advocacy organisation. So I call it different things depending on the person I'm talking to. It could be anything from an advocacy organisation, if I'm talking to a person with a disability, to a management consultancy if I'm talking to a corporate audience. An example of what I could do with a corporate audience is develop what they call an inclusion and diversity plan. So an inclusion and diversity plan is how they work with people with disability either as customers or as staff. So that's one part of what I do in the corporate world. And then I do a bit of disability policy work. So disability policy work tends to be what you do in the government sense. And a couple of the big projects that I'm working on at the moment are mostly around transport. The Disability Standards for Accessible Public Transport is the best example. It's the piece of legislation that defines how buses are made, how trains are made, how train stations are made accessible. And it's going through what government calls a modernisation, what I call a redo. They're reviewing that piece of legislation. And I'm employed as a disability voice on that program to make sure that when they're developing those new standards, that they've got a disability voice in the room. So I as best as I can, represent the disability voice in those kinds of rooms to make sure that when policy is being developed, when legislation is being developed, it's being developed with us in mind, so that it's not being developed by the stereotypical middle-aged white guy in a suit is typically who legislation is developed by. Making sure that there's a disability voice in the room is really important when you're doing that kind of thing.
Right, that's great. Mate, I'd just like to step back just a little bit, because we know you've been a Paralympian. Where did you end up? Where'd you compete?
So I did Sydney and Athens. Sydney, I was lucky enough to win the gold in the 100 metres. Got beaten by a 21-year-old in Sydney, and I won as a 21-year-old in Sydney, and got beaten by a 21-year-old in Athens. So probably should have seen the writing on the wall a little bit earlier there. Funnily enough, in Tokyo last year or this year, the winner was beaten by a 21-year-old again, and that winner happened to be the guy that beat me in Athens. So there you go, it's a 21-year-old's game.
Well, there you go. So, mate, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of the equipment that you use, because I know you still get out there, you do some fun runs, you do, I think you just did the bridge to Brisbane.
Yep, bridge to Brisbane. Got beaten by a girl, mate. Got beaten by Sarah Tate, a young up and coming para triathlete. I've never been prouder to get beaten by anyone.
So, what motivates you to keep doing these things? I know, because I know you're retired. You've got your family, you got your business, you got all your other things that you're doing. What keeps motivating you to go out and still compete in these little events? Oh, yeah. Not little events, of course, but you know.
Well, it's a little event is 100 meters at a time for me, George, when you're doing a 10K. But it's different motivation now to what it was when I was doing it professionally, but in a lot of ways it's the same. It's striving to be better than what you were the day before. It's striving to achieve a goal. It's setting a goal and aiming towards it. Some of my goals have taken an absolute battering during COVID. This year and last year were meant to be the years that I started to do marathons. And that's taken an absolute battering during COVID because they're all cancelled. But goal setting is one of those things where whether you're a Paralympic athlete or whether you're the over 40s athlete that's just out there to try and stay fit and achieve a couple of goals, achieving goals is still something that everyone has in common. So that's what it comes down to for me is setting out goals and achieving them, because that's what makes you feel good about yourself. It's what makes you get up in the morning and go, you know what, I'm doing all right. I'm not doing too bad. I'm doing better now than what I was than what I was last week, than what I was the week before. And it keeps you moving forward and moving in the right direction. That's what it's about for me.
Yeah, that's great, mate. That's
having
great.
something to be proud of.
Yes, exactly. And we know that, as I said before, now you're married, you've got your kids, and you're doing all that.
And those goals, they don't have to happen on the sporting field. They can be goals as a father, goals as a husband. We're looking for a new house at the moment, and that goal of finding a house that suits everyone in the family is another goal that's not sporting related in any way, shape, sense, or form. But they're the goals that you can take on, whether you live with a disability or not.
Yeah. And business goals. What do you see yourself doing in, say, 5, 10 years time or something like that?
Yeah, for me, the disability advocacy space is tough, man. It's tough work. You don't win very many arguments in my business. When it comes down to it, the infrastructure space that you work in, it's big money, George. You can't touch a train station without it being a couple of $1 million worth of work. So you don't tend to win too many arguments. So for me, the goals that I'm trying to achieve is to instill that desire to improve community into as many other people as possible, because I'm not going to be able to do this forever. I'm going to need to move on to bigger and better things. So most of the work that I do, it's always done with that auxiliary goal of finding people that can do the work that you could never finish. Because some of the work that I do, most of the work I do, it's been started by other people 10, 15, 20 years ago. And we've got to remember there's always going to be those other generations coming through. So everything that I do in my work is about finding those younger people that can continue the work that I'm doing now, long after I've moved off into the sunset to other things. Finding those people is really key in disability advocacy, and it's a role that organisations like Spina Bifida Association can play a huge part in through their peer groups. Finding those people that have got that passion is a really important aspect of those groups.
Well, mate, look, I don't have any more questions for you because you've answered all my questions. Just last parting words, what would you say to someone who you've met for the first time, doesn't know what they're doing in their life, and they've got the disability? We all know we've got SBH, spina bifida hydrocephalus, or one or the other, or both. And some of us are lucky that we only got the one. So what would you say to someone, and the parents actually, what would you say to the parents more likely?
For me, it comes down to living your own life. That'd be the advice that I'd give everyone. Is you'll get told by doctors, you'll get told by teachers, you get told by social workers what the life is that you should have. But ultimately, it's yours. You can live it however you want to, and you are the creator of that life. You don't need to live it how they say. You can live it however you want to. You've just got to have the passion to go out there and do it. So go out there, experience as many different things as you can within the boundaries of what life has given you, and you'll find the things that make you passionate.
Well, mate, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's really been great to catch up with you, Geoff.
No problem, buddy. Pleasure. Anytime.
Looking forward to catching up with you again soon, someday. And there you go, folks. Geoff Trappett, Paralympian retired, still out there living life to the fullest. So if you'd like to know more information, please give us a call at SBH Queensland, and we will endeavour to give you what you need. Take care and bye for now.